So, it's January 23rd, 2019. We're making a recording of Potkaars. And that thing typically comes with a candle. So I'm going to do a little candle gimmick here. Oh, Potkaars in Dutch is pot with candle. In English it's just a podcast. So, my guest today is Mr. Thomas Drake and Raymond Johansson, who are perfectly capable of introducing themselves. So, Mr. Thomas Drake, please, if you would introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Thomas Drake, a former senior executive at the National Security Agency, wide-ranging career in the military as well as industry, where I did a lot of IT development, both software system engineering, security engineering. I was a principal in a couple of .coms. So it's probably a summary.
So
although I did come under I was brought to the attention of the government here a few years ago in a case that went quite public a number of years before Snowden.
Yeah, I only got to know your story after Snowden's revelations and saw many interviews in 2013, 2014. So great to have you here. Look back a little bit on that period, but mainly look at today and maybe look ahead a little bit. Our other guest is Raymond Johansson. Welcome, Ray.
Hi. First of all, Thomas, great seeing you again. The last time we met was in RightsCon in Toronto, Canada, right? Where we also had Jesslyn Raddock up there.
Yes.
Hope she is well too. And I bet that Rico wouldn't mind inviting her when the situation was right, and sometime in the future. She has clients, and I bet she would want to spread information about them. I am a mayor board member of PPI. My colleague and boss, the vice chair of PPI, Bailey Lemon, who's also my partner from Canada, was supposed to be here. And Thomas, she says she's really sorry she couldn't make it. Unavoidable situation.
Please give me my regards.
Yes, I will. Now, I'm going to just say, because in a week it's going to be become quite clear to everybody that I'm about to change how I do things. 17 months ago, I started working on pursuance to make tools for activists instead of trying beating the activists all over the scale. Give them tools and let them work. Funding is always the challenge. Now I have been hired as an operations manager of a US-based nonprofit. So I will make a brave attempt to enter into the United States on the 31st of this year at JFK, so that everybody knows where to hassle me.
So if you want to meet him,
and then everything else is secret, but that is me. And I'm not here to talk. I'm here to make sure that you get your job properly, Rico.
Thanks. All right. Well, good luck on your new job, and we'll hear about that in the future. So you mentioned Jesslyn Raddock, and preparing for this talk, I heard you say, Thomas, that back then when you were defending against U.S. government, that she was defending you in a court of public opinion. Really, that was her job back in that time. So how was public opinion for you then that you needed defending against back in 2014 or so?
Well, she provided more than that. She also did extraordinary legal counsel and advice for me, because a lot of what took place in the courtroom was sealed because of the rather egregious nature of the charges, which included, or allegedly included, charges that involved classified information at the highest level in the United States government. But I knew when I was so publicly charged, if you go back and actually listen to the government's very public statements about me. They made it crystal clear that I was a really, really bad person, that I was effectively an enemy of the state, and that they were going to come after me with everything they had, and they were looking forward to seeing me put away for a long, long time. So I knew that I would have to defend myself in the press. And part of the irony is that I had ultimately gone to the press with what I knew and involving government criminal activity up to and including the President of the United States, as well as 9/11 intelligence failures and massive fraud, waste, and abuse in the billions and billions and billions of dollars. And then the subsequent cover-up of 9/11 in terms of what the government should have known, could have known, did know, but refused or deliberately did not share. And so the burdens of history weigh quite heavily on me, even to this day, because I will still wake up in the middle of the night and ask that question about the what if. What if we had actually sent out the warning? What if the warnings that were sent out were heeded? What if actual intelligence that was buried or was discovered later, both pre and post 9/11 intelligence, had actually been shared?
Yeah, and also
I will assert that 9/11 could have been prevented. But I knew that when I got charged in 2010 in such a public manner, I would have to find a way to influence the court of public opinion, and that's done through the press.
Yeah.
And it was Jesselyn Radak that led that effort. She came up with the media strategy in which I would ultimately be defended by her because I didn't have a voice. I couldn't. Anything I said could be used against me by the government. So she was my voice when I had none.
Yeah. So you were painted as a criminal enemy of the state. So that was in the papers, and that was how official communication was about you. But what I saw from Holland when Snowden made his revelations, that was in the news, and only then did I learn about Thomas Drake. So I didn't care much. So as far as my public opinion went, I didn't care much for how you were publicly depicted. I just saw, there were whistleblowers before Snowden also.
Yeah, a lot of people found out that much of what Snowden had disclosed had actually been disclosed many years earlier, including from people like myself. But it was mostly in the United States. There was some press reporting on my case, but Snowden went global. And so a lot of people are asking, well, why did anybody know? Why are we hearing this for the first time? It actually wasn't the first time. It just rose to a level where the attention that was being played, of course, he was a fugitive from U.S. injustice, as I say, became very public, right? Rather a lot of drama, right, in the press as to what would happen to him, particularly when he himself decided to go public, even over the objections of the reporters in which he had ultimately disclosed the information he brought out from NSA. So the government charged me with espionage, under the Espionage Act. It's a World War I era statute. And so you're behind several 8 balls. And I think media and even non-mainstream media, especially given it was under the Obama administration, said, well, he must be a really bad person if they're charging him with espionage. It was such a rare charge to indict someone under. I mean, the last whistleblower that had been indicted for espionage was Daniel Ellsberg.
Can I insert something here, Rico? We run in some of the same circles. And you heard mention of the use of the Espionage Act when the hunt really started. Maybe here's a template for how they're going after whistleblowers as we speak. So quite a lot of us has noted that from what high-level whistleblower this was.
And I was fully aware of that also when I read into that. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Thomas, is after you did your whistleblowing and then you had to defend yourself and went through all that, and after that was finished, you made a conscious decision to stand up for whistleblowers and generate a room in public opinion for their stories to be heard. That's why you're doing, back then anyway, and still I think, all these interviews. So the public opinion that was used against you back then, has that changed by now, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, in terms of the press and reporting on my case, it took almost a year under the extraordinary focus and leadership of Justin Radak to turn that around. There was a number of people that began to come forward, though. Again, I credit Justin Radak. I mean, people just really had painted me into a corner. They were giving Obama and his administration the benefit of the doubt, given the egregious crimes that apparently I had committed against the United States. I mean, it was equivalent being called a traitor. It really was. I mean, I still relive that period, and it continues to resonate even to this day, in some ways, in ways that a lot of us were concerned about, especially with the emergence of the Trump administration. And even more investigations that have been launched by Trump than were ever launched under Obama. So the press, and of course I have a very mixed perspective on the press, because the press that I allegedly had gone to by the government, although I did ultimately go to a single reporter with what I knew that was unclassified, that I felt was critical in the public interest. And I mean, that's a whole story in itself, including how do you even contact a reporter in an encrypted manner, knowing the reporter has no idea about encryption, and knowing that the government is actually spying on her in secret, including all of her accounts and her computer. I knew that she was already compromised. So how do you make contact? That's a story in itself that I have not often said. A lot of people don't understand or recognize. I also had a rather technical background. In fact, the government tried to use that against me. And another irony in my case is that ultimately, when I did plead out, it was under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, okay, which has been the traditional go-to criminal code of the United States to go after hacktivists. Yeah. So this is a very, very wide-ranging history. But I was the signature case under Obama. It was the template of, Ray is correct, it was the template by which all other whistleblowers and truth tellers are charged, 8 in total, although there was others that got caught up. A number of people were threatened with the Espionage Act or the equivalent. So it was the signature case under Obama, and it laid the foundation for all the other cases. Remember, my case hit the public airways thanks to the United States government before Chelsea Manning, before John Kiriakou, before Stephen Kim, and a number of others. Before Jeffrey Sterling. All those followed. In fact, no one knew about Manning, right? We knew about the collateral murder video that was released by WikiLeaks, but it was only speculation as to who the possible source was. Manning ultimately was arrested, detained, and tortured starting in May of 2010. All this followed. So the government had already been doing a long multi-year investigation in which I was caught up many, many years earlier.
If you look back on, you had to make a conscious decision on how to approach, the ethical decision that you made for yourself. I mean, you were working at NSA at a pretty high level job, and you figured, okay, what we're doing here, this is not constitutional. We need to change this. And you made a conscious decision to do that by the book, as far as I'm aware.
Well, by the book was right after 9/11. I mean, this is something that a lot of people don't understand. The whistleblowing didn't take place when it was the start. Didn't take place. I went to the press. I went through every channel that existed, including my own supervisor, who was the number 3 person at NSA, the head of the Signals Intelligence Directorate. I knew that word had already gotten out that the verbal order had been issued in secret by President Bush via Cheney and Tenet and General Hayden that the United States government was going to secretly allow the National Security Agency to turn its enormous power of surveillance, which historically, although it ran into trouble in the 1970s after decades of involving itself domestically, but historically was supposed to be foreign facing, so going out, not in. Here in secret, and that's a whole nother, why would they do all this in secret? Well, I know why. This is the eyewitness to history. Remember, this is the deep burdens of history that still weigh heavily on me. But they decided the NSA would be allowed under presidential authority, raw executive authority, not a democracy, certainly not a constitutional republic, abject violation of the Constitution, to which I have taken an oath 4 times to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The NSA would be licensed to surveil the United States of America for the purposes of national security. And it didn't matter if anybody in the United States got caught up in the dragnet. It didn't matter. As I was told by the lead attorney 3 weeks after 9/11, we just need the data. You don't understand.
So if NSA becomes inward facing, does that mean that those services consider the future threat or whatever they're supposed to fight against to be coming from the inside as well, rather than from outside the United States?
Well, but I heard the arguments. We don't know where they are. They've, obviously 9/11, happened. There were, the 9/11 hijackers, a number of them were actually living in the United States, some of them upwards of a year or so. That's a whole story in itself, to which I also have, critical knowledge in terms of how could that even happen? I mean, how did the national security establishment utterly fail to protect almost 3,000 people, including almost 300 foreign nationals living in the United States legally? Almost 3,000 people were murdered on 9/11, right? That's, again, another part of this entire tragic history.
If you look back on
the threat was considered internal, and they decided to set aside the Constitution, subvert it in the name of national security. So it was the ends justifies the means.
Yeah. If you look back,
Rico,
yeah, sure, right.
Okay, so let me put us all up so we can see everybody. Those few that knows me maybe see me as a pirate activist, but I've been working with Anonymous for almost as long, not under my own name, of course, but been there and seeing how the government the US government or the UK government wasn't really prepared to handle this. So they dug up a semi-old law called the CFAA that Thomas mentioned. I've been the support network through Free Anons for, I think, 8 people that have thrown one of the most general laws that there is. It wasn't made for this purpose, no. But when the federal government threatens you, like they did with Lori Love in 99 years, then they get pressure, and then it becomes even more serious here. And I'm getting to the point really quickly. And then they start throwing a 1917 or 1912 law called the Espionage Act, which is ridiculous. And they just do whatever they have to do, no matter the cost, because they are doing bad. They know they are doing bad. Transparency is bad for them. They must therefore keep things secret. And to do that, they must break the law, even the constitution of the land. So they will attack to make an example of anybody who takes their duty as a citizen seriously and enforce transparency. Yeah. Enforce it. By that I mean either you're a journalist or a group of journalists that really do investigative journalism. There is a leak. A leaker is also somebody who enforces transparency. Somebody who hacks enforces transparency, and somebody who blows the whistle enforces transparency because the government is not willing to do it. and they will become more and more corrupt and do more and more wrong things if we do not enforce that transparency, and if we don't stand behind Thomas Drake and everybody else, Matty Hart, Lori Love, the list goes on. If we do not stand behind all of those, then they can just keep on doing what they're doing.
Yeah,
But of course,
that's two things that we need to do: stand behind the people that have taken a risk and come out, and also create an environment for other people to feel safe to make known whatever wrongdoings might still be going on. Future whistleblowers.
Yeah, Lori Love is very much a parallel case to mine in terms of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. They tried to extradite him. Fortunately, justice did prevail, and he's still in the UK. Now he's trying to get back, his equipment. I went through the same exercise. I mean, it took longer to get back some of my equipment and papers than it did in terms of the length of the criminal prosecution conducted by the government against me. I mean, we're living in these are perilous times. They really are. I mean, I have said we're the canaries, in the coal mine of freedom and liberty and human rights, and we're the ones that have taken extraordinary risks. I'm an incredibly fortunate person, and that I ultimately did not go to prison, but I came very, very close to doing so. And that was ironically primarily because, as Snowden himself realized, having learned and why he'd watched and learned from my own case and others, but in particularly my own case, what was it going to take to have any chance at all of escaping the clutches of the United States? He knew he would have to leave the U.S., and it was not his plan to end up in Russia. He actually had flight, the manifest shows that he was actually headed to South America. But leaving all that aside, I will also say, if to the degree to which the government charges people under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and or the Espionage Act, or the equivalent of both, is the degree to which they want to hide and protect the secrets of all of their wrongdoing. I can tell inversely proportional. Why would the government want to go after me for having blown the whistle within this system over many, many years, up to the highest levels, even at NSA, and it's a number of formal investigations that happened after 9/11, over several years after 9/11. Why would the government be so willing to go after people like myself? Because they're attempting to protect the secrets of their own wrongdoing, and they're attempting to hide behind national security to not just continue to conduct that activity, but to punish anyone who dares to hold up the mirror and call them to account.
Yeah.
But I can tell. But we do this. We don't do this as a group. We normally. I mean, I didn't wake up. Even I am at NSA serving my country, and to my horror, I'm watching what's unfold in slow motion right after 9/11. That the government's going to use 9/11 as an excuse to set aside everything that I took an oath to defend. There was no way that I could let that go by. But I recognize in saying that very few people stand up.
In hindsight, what happened to you that you foresaw, and what happened to you that you did not foresee, coming from the government on your case?
There was no naivete on my part. I've had some people think that somehow I stepped into a briar patch that I didn't know I was stepping into, or somehow I got caught, in a bear trap, and didn't realize, or stepping across the minefield, or I end up in quicksand and it was all my fault. No, I knew exactly what was. I knew the risks. The risks were huge. I was very familiar with the 1970s. I was a very young teenager watching what unfold during the 70s in terms of Ellsberg and Watergate, ultimately the resignation of a U.S. president, and then the subsequent investigations that ensued. And here I was on a far more pervasive scale, far more invasive scale, even though NSA itself had abused the rights of Americans over with a number of secret programs, even up to and including the Nixon administration. A lot of this came out during congressional investigations and hearings. So I was very familiar with what the risks were. And here we're now post 9/11. I knew what one of the risks is I could end up in prison for a long, long time. And in fact, the government originally threatened me, the chief prosecutor threatened me with spending the rest of my life in prison unless I cooperated, which is another part. This gets into the CFAA. Unless I cooperated, quote unquote, rolled up the networks that I was a part of. They considered me the ringleader. So they wanted me to expose everybody else I knew and anybody else that had any knowledge that I had or had possibly provided me knowledge, or simply go after those who had associations with me. They still did that, by the way.
So it's made a... Sure.
May I, Rico? There is a particular category of people that should be called brave. Thomas Drake is just like Snowden. They knew somehow that their lives, as they knew it, was over and that they were in peril. But then when they choose to put themselves in that kind of danger, that's just a testament to bravery. And if the governments were filled with people that cared about right and wrong, we wouldn't be here with what do we call the press earlier, the fourth estate? They're barely, we can barely see them. We have to have more brave whistleblowers. We have to have journalists cooperating with each other across the globe, like ICT, the consortium that did the Panama Papers. I can't remember their acronym. But there are not many. Maybe we are talking about 10 whistleblowers of the caliber of Thomas, and it has been fewer because Obama started to really go after them, and they also went after Anons. We enforced transparency by taking the information out that we needed, that we wouldn't get. We used FOIA techniques. We used open source intelligence. We couldn't get to it. Then you have to hack. A crew I was a part of, we took an NSA server, an NSA mail server. That's public. So
just today,
but still, the bravery is immense among these people, and maybe there are 20 that I know the names of, but there are fewer and fewer and fewer as a result of them using CFAA and going after all Anons so hard that we're a mere shadow of ourselves. The only effective Anons left now are working in a very different way and are not bragging about what they do, but things are happening still. But Reality Winner, the last one, is almost the worst one. A young woman that is a real somebody who believes in her country and actually did the right thing. There's no way to make a case for her doing the wrong thing. She's beholden to all the people, not to a government that protects itself instead of represent the people. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, so Reality Winner was one of the more recent publicly known whistleblowers who was convicted, is now serving a sentence of over 5 years. We talked about that last time. Now, Thomas, when Trump ran for president, I believe he made a statement, I'm a fan of WikiLeaks. Now that he's been there as a president, Reality Winner was convicted under his presidency. Has anything changed with the Trump administration for better or worse in your observation?
Well, I've been asked this question several times since Trump became president. I was not surprised that Trump became president, and I actually blame the people of the United States. I recognize there was a lot of influence. I recognize there was manipulation. I recognize there were electoral systems that were targeted. This is where reality winner comes in, and we can get to her here shortly. But the fact remains that Trump is Trump is not Obama, but everything that Bush handed off to Obama that then was legalized by Obama. Okay, I have to say it that way because that's the fact. He even said that Jon Stewart, when Jon Stewart was about to leave the Daily Show, he actually brought Obama on. And Obama, you could tell, was already looking forward to his legacy, and he used the phrase "legal framework." The only framework he was ever legally responsible for protecting, preserving, defending was the Constitution of the United States. And this, came from a former constitutional law lecturer, right? And this is the president of the United States saying it. He handed all this off to Trump. It didn't surprise me at all that the government would up the ante. Remember, it's important. Reality winner was the signature case under Trump, as I was the signature case under Obama. The difference is they threw her into a county prison and basically tossed the key away and wouldn't even allow her any. And I didn't go through this part, right? Although they threatened me with a number of things, flight risk. They did confiscate my passport. They did Mirandize me, by the way, unlike her. But in this case, they were going to treat her just like an enemy combatant. That extraordinarily overloaded phrase. It's Orwellian in terms of what it means, right? The newspeak meaning of an enemy combatant, treating a reality winner as an enemy combatant in the United States, and wouldn't even grant her the ability. She couldn't raise post bond, right? They wouldn't even allow it. She was on it, which made it extraordinarily difficult. It was difficult enough for me to defend myself, right? And I was still free. I would have been free up unless I had been convicted, right, of any of the 10 felony counts against me. In her case, she was also charged under the Espionage Act, but they actually detained her in prison, pretrial confinement. Okay, this is where it's similar to Chelsea Manning, pretrial confinement, and the pressures are enormous, right? She's had outside of the military court system, which is what Chelsea has a court martial experience, and I am intimately familiar with the military, given my own service, both Air Force and Navy. She's received the longest sentence. She is at her heart a true American. I mean, she simply saw something, actually said, I'm going to say something, and I'm going to say it, share it with a press outlet. And so she did. And she did so, right? Irrespective of what the risks and dangers were, but the danger to the Republic was even greater. How can you actually have critical infrastructure based on what she discovered, came across, her desk, as it were, her computer screen? How can you, it's national security. I mean, if the election system of a democracy is not protected, and it's being intruded upon, or worse, there's manipulation going on, by other forces, in this case, even elements of a foreign power, then yeah, that's a huge red flag. That's an alert. I mean, and here was, ironically enough, information that was held secret away from the public. The public didn't know this. And I find it incredibly, it's just the historical ironies of then that information being used by even the Mueller investigation and by others as an alert, right, to, wow, we better protect that part of infrastructure because it's pretty wide open and it's susceptible to abuse and misuse. I'm not even talking about a lot of the other problems that we have. So with critical infrastructure like that, but that's, again, gets back to, that is in fact a direct threat on the well-being of a democracy if your election system, or even the possibility that it could be manipulated. Whether it is or isn't is a separate question from the fact that it raises doubt about every vote counts.
What do you want to say, Ray?
Yeah. Yes, I really want to. The reason why they basically isolated her and sabotaged all efforts to get her story out, and also the reason why they chose the Espionage Act is because if this young woman had gone on the talk show host tour in under 3 weeks, the narrative would have been turned upside down. And a lot of strong people will have come in, because there are good people in government, but they will have risen up, and that is the danger. Because she's charming, she's smart, she has humor, and she does all of this despite having an illness, which it makes it even more cruel to put somebody in indefinite detention. NDAA, isn't that one of Obama's legacy things too?
Yeah.
You can just put people away. You're a bad country. No. The government is bad.
Brings us back to public opinion, right? So that's the main. Would be the main threat to current state of government. And I agree. Transparency would be the solution. If you can enforce that, then at least.
So that's the word that's Orwellian in nature, is they have to restrict. The government wants to restrict transparency because it doesn't want too much attention being played on what it's doing. And if anybody dares expose what it's doing, then they don't want that publicity either, because that would raise very uncomfortable questions. So you isolate, you separate, and in reality's case, even beyond me, they put her into, as Ray said, indefinite detention. And that isolates her and further restricts the access. When you're in that kind of situation, it's extremely difficult for anybody to have any form of communication with her. Obviously, everything is susceptible to monitoring. And you're only allowed certain kinds of visitors, right? Not just anybody can show up, even at a county prison, and start talking to an inmate. It's still surreal for me, just after all these years, post 9/11, how far the government is willing to go in punishing people simply for holding up the mirror and saying, hey, government, you're not actually operating on behalf of the people. You're actually operating against what's best for people. And in fact, you're violating laws. You're violating the integrity of people. You're engaging in activity. And then you're using national security not only as a reason for doing so, you're going to use it to also hide what you're doing under the blanket of national security. It's sort of a double bind that the government then is allowed to use. And then you have access press. And this is where, again, my perspective on press is extremely mixed. My own experience, a lot of people don't realize, there were reporters in which I met off the record. Remember, I could not be on the record because of what I faced. Off the record, pre-trial, did not believe me. They preferred to accept the government's narrative as to what had happened.
Has that changed?
We're going back to the government with what I said. Now you tell me. That's why my trust in the press, I don't have much trust in the press. I have to say it that way. It's extremely difficult to know who to trust. It's also this, I got to get the next scoop. And even if it's a legitimate reporter, who cares what happens to the source? I'll save my skin and I'll sacrifice my source. This is a whole nother dimension to this that many are still not talking enough about. It's also why Jocelyn Radek is in terms of her own Whisper, she's the director of Whisper, the Whistleblower and Source Protection Program, has put huge emphasis on source protection. And it's actually incumbent upon the reporter, the media outlet, investigative journalists, to ensure that they protect their source. It's not the source's responsibility. Now, there are things a source can do, and I'm intimately familiar with what can a source do. But especially since my case and others, remember, we were sort of the first ones out of the gate, besides the others that got caught up under the CFAA. What is the responsibility of the media? Don't burn your source for the sake of a story. That's the last thing you're going to do. So and if you're doing that, and when that happens, what other information are you will not have access to, play on words here on purpose, from a source like myself, because you didn't protect the previous source? There's going to be extraordinary reluctance on the part of a whistleblower or truth teller to go to the press, similar to what happened to reality, in which the press outlet then goes back to the government with the source material. That's the last thing you're supposed to do.
But press is changing also currently. I mean, this channel is press also, right?
Yes.
So since the big media outlets in your country and mine as well, all over the place, are failing their job to be responsible journalists as we look at it, well, new ones pop up.
Yes.
Right? So we create our own press. No?
Yes, and that was part of the saving grace in my own case. It wasn't just mainstream media, although they had a critical role in the end. Even the Washington Post was holding up a mirror in 2 op-eds back to the government saying, why are you going after Mr. Drake? I think he is a whistleblower. And oh, by the way, we do have an interest in what goes on inside the halls of government, even behind closed doors, particularly when it's in the interest of the public to know.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to why media appears not to be doing their job on delivering the true story out there and where the wrongdoings are. So my question was, why aren't they doing it? So is that out of fear or ignorance, or what is it, Thomas?
Infiltration.
Talking mainstream media, I think in part there is out of fear, and they don't want to lose access to the halls of power, both corporate, as we sometimes forget, both corporate as well as the political halls of power. Power is a very seductive thing, and when you have access to it, it in itself, it's also, you get to bask in some of that seductive nature of power because you're close to it. That's what they call access press. And so I think part of it is that you don't want to lose access. You also don't want to upset power, because you might lose your ability to have an interview. You might lose your ability to hear from the government. But this to me is the contradiction, the hypocrisy. Access press means that you're willing to then serve basically as a stenographer or as a parrot of power. Yep. By definition, if you're granted access by power, that's on their terms. So your willingness to report the other side, or to report what's really going on, or to report the more unseemly sides of power, or what's going on behind the halls of power, right? When I say behind the halls of power, in the rooms that are off the halls of power, okay? So if you're gonna be reluctant, you'll allow yourself, in some cases, you'll self-censor anything that might raise questions about your loyalty to the access you've been granted. So why would you want to jeopardize that? If you're mainstream media,
because it's your job.
Well, but then you're not doing your job. You're not willing to actually pursue the stories that are actually in the larger public interest, not just in the interest of power.
So when you blew the whistle, you went by the rules for whistleblowing. You did the ethical road, so to speak, or whatever. That's maybe a wrong word, but anyway, you get what I'm talking about. Now, what happened to you was educational to Ed Snowden, and he chose a different path. He went to mainstream media. You could say.
Look, I can tell you what would have happened to him if he had stayed in the United States. His fate would have been worse in reality. Not only would he have been indefinitely detained, he would have put in equivalent of maximum isolation. Yeah, there's no question in my mind.
Yeah, and no exposure. So you could.
Yep. That's crystal clear. Given the nature of the material that he brought out, which, yes, admittedly was highly classified. Okay, although that's what the government said about me too. So I certainly, it didn't really matter whether it was or wasn't, or it didn't matter, right? There was no question that he would not have had a voice. He would have been so isolated. It would have been worse. It would have been the equivalent of reality, but in a maximum prison. In fact, they would have probably made it extraordinarily difficult for even a lawyer to have access to him. As hard as it was for reality to have the lawyers have any access at all. And that's another whole story here. It's very difficult to mount a defense with a defendant charged on espionage when they're sitting in a jailhouse.
So
I believe they would have put Snowden in isolation. Oh yeah.
I wanted to quickly say that Kath Weiner, the editor-in-chief of The Guardian, single-handedly has removed the respect of the whole newspaper by publicizing something that they had no real sources of, and they refuse to retract and basically ignore everybody. That's how bad it is when the editor-in-chief of one of the most important outlets of the world have become puppets of the government. We have to enforce transparency. We have to have whistleblowers, and we have to take better care of them.
Well, the tricky bit with enforcing transparency is that you need to be in power to enforce it through the structure of power, or demand it from bottom up. But then you have to work outside of the current structures. So if someone is currently making an ethical decision on blowing the whistle on whatever, how would they go about that then? They wouldn't necessarily now go to a mainstream media outlet anymore, or would they?
Yeah, they may not, and if they don't, then that means it's harder to get it out there in front of the public and for people to know about this. I mean, that's why in some ways the Panama Papers, that consortium, is in fact a model with mainstream media and even non or second or third tier, what's called second or third tier, more independent media. That was an extraordinary effort. They protected the sources. There's no indication that the source has been compromised. That means they had extraordinary security. They had very savvy journalists, and it was understood that the effort was so large based on the sheer amount of the material that was disclosed by the whistleblowers, because whistleblower in this context could be easily plural, could be, right? Could be one person, it could be plural. They had to have an international consortium to sort through it all and to figure out what those threads were and to how far the global corruption had gone by virtue of the Panama Papers disclosures alone. And so that is a model. In some ways, I'll say it this way, it's almost post-WikiLeaks in that you actually do have very responsible journalists from both mainstream media and independent or more independent media who are actually cooperating together, recognizing that fundamentally it's about the transparency and to ensure the responsibility and responsible reporting is made on behalf of the public, given just the level of corruption that's revealed from what's already been published on the Panama Papers. So this is to me is an exemplar of it is. I mean, WikiLeaks pioneered sort of scientific journalism, which is where you actually let the data, let the information be free, let it say what it says, unencumbered by other filters. They've taken hits for them, but you have to remember, even the early days of WikiLeaks, there were consortiums, there was partnerships with papers like the Washington Post, the Guardian, a number of other European papers, the New York Times, again in the United States, in which there were in fact joint publication. I remember articles even coming out from one of the primary journalists. The early reporting, it was done on even the Stowe disclosures, also involved a very, very good independent investigative reporter who at the time was actually working with the Post. It was Bart Gellman.
Right. So if you look at mainstream media a couple of years ago, and then the way we've just discussed that, and people might move more to independent outlets or to the internet, so to speak, would you place the drill downs, my words, but whatever, on fake news in that respect also, and government control what's true or not out there on the internet? Is that something that in an Orwellian scale that's upping the scale?
In many respects, it is Orwellian, or as I say, sort of a combination of Orwell and Huxley, okay, mixed in with the technology of today. No, there is a huge concern that any attempt by the government. I mean, look, I myself is leading example. Let's criminalize a whistleblower. Let's criminalize the source. Going to the press is a criminal act. That in itself should tell you something. If you go to the press with something that power does not want the public to know, and then they just consider that act to be criminal, we are way, way down that slippery slope of dystopia, sliding into the dark waters. We really are. So any attempt by the government to shape, influence, or leak themselves, not for the public interest, but to shape, that's propaganda. The last thing you want is the government using the press as a press outlet, or to issue the latest, public affairs statement. It's not public affairs, it's to actually shape, and that means fake news, so be it. I mean, in some ways, Trump has actually raised this to an art form. I have to say it that way. Trump himself. It's not, his leaving aside his so-called deals. Many of them went utterly bankrupt, right? He's a master at fake news. He knows precisely how to talk and push the buttons of his base. He wants division. He wants to see people fighting. He's a counterpuncher. You cannot underestimate him. And he certainly has more than just the bully pulpit right now. This latest, I mean, it's theater at one level, but this is not just a TV show. This is for real. It's affecting people's lives. It's affecting people's livelihoods. It's affecting the future of democracy. It is certainly accelerating what I call the de-evolution of democracy in the United States. It's obviously having an impact around the world as well, because we don't live in a bubble. As much as he lives in a bubble, we certainly don't live in a bubble in the real world. But for him, this is all pleasure. For him, the pathology of all this is what he enjoys. He loves to see people going at it. He wants to incite. He wants to incite all those deep. He wants, basically the worst of our own humanity. He plays all that up. Even right now, he's accepted, right? The invitation, which is not. You have to be in. Basically, it's an invitation from the House of Representatives by the Speaker of the House, this case Nancy Pelosi. He's now just saying, as the bully, I'm just going to show up. What are you going to do about it?
Yep, it works. It's brilliant marketing. That's what he does.
Brilliant. Well, that's his branding and marketing, and he loves this. Yeah. And he's doing all this in social media, no less.
Well, he's seen as a clown, and he was seen as not dangerous and not a threat, even by those that hijacked the Democratic National Congress, to torpedo Sanders, the almost social democrat. So everybody underestimated him, and they continue to do so. Yes. But I think Thomas is right. I think you're right. He still commands so many people, and the two camps inside the DNC, if they don't come up with some progression and start working together, he will win again. Why? Because the billionaires behind him have both the technology and the willingness to do whatever. Election meddling, it is Breitbart and the tech companies from Canada and the UK. I can't remember their names. They did Brexit, and they made Trump win.
Oh, the Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, in fact, I mean, it's the history of this, and this is where the press fell flat. They were so enamored by the latest sayings from Trump, right? And it was all of his rallies, which in itself speaks to sort of the darker chapters of even European history. The rallies where you show up and speak in front of, you know, hundreds and thousands, and then you point out the press and call them the enemy of the people. I mean, it's president now as president, he calls all that. So their polling information, which was extremely well done, right? Should have been fully investigated, actually out Hillary and even out Obama's, because he was considered to have been the master of all this when he became president in terms of polling data, knowing where to target, knowing where the areas were in which you were weaker, and knowing where you needed to send your message.
So why can't we
Trump took it to just a few states that were going to make the difference, and that was where they concentrated.
So why can't the United States come up with an alternative then? I mean, if the only thing we can come up with is Hillary Clinton, then yeah.
But that was that's also part of what the challenge was, is that she herself thought that history owed her the presidency, that, as I call it, it's now my turn, Hillary. Yeah. History didn't owe her the presidency. She was going to have to do it on her own merits, and she had extremely high negatives. And she sabotaged Bernie and any other independent Democrat, let alone Bernie, from even considering, right? They clearly, and Bernie didn't fight her. Bernie came from my home state, Vermont, right? I knew him when he was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, before he ever went onto the national stage, which was now several decades ago.
As seen from Holland, I wish he'd put up more of a fight.
But he said he would take it all the way to the floor of the convention. He didn't.
No, why?
He blinked.
Why
not? He folded.
Yeah.
Incredible disappointment, because I work with a lot of younger people. And, you know, now you have Gen Z is following the millennials, but many of the millennials, right, were very heartened, which is why I think many of them now are very heartened by ACO, right? You know, from the Queens in the Bronx. She's now, right, she's in some ways is the next generation, right? Definitely post World War II, even post 9/11. You have to remember, a lot of the people that are now entering politics were just little kids, right, when 9/11 happened. They weren't even teenagers in some cases.
Can I ask both of you about something? You know, everybody knows the fact that the United States have 5% of the population of the world, and the rest of the 95%, they probably have bases, military bases in most of those countries, and the U.S. is doing such a fine blackmail thing where they pressure whole governments to do their bidding and make laws that protects the industries of the U.S. It's basically they're bad. All that is happening is bad. But are Americans thinking that they have a moral high ground?
Well, I say it's always difficult. I will, stereotype. I have to be careful of stereotypes. What's called average American, or the great unwashed masses, or the silent majority, as Richard Nixon used to say, right? But it's probably a fair statement that sort of say a historical aberration or geographical aberration, the sea to shining sea, right? That you have a country that's actually enjoyed relative isolation from the rest of the world, despite its own history in terms of the indigenous populations, manifest destiny. If you just sort of temporarily leave that aside, I think it's true that most Americans don't really appreciate how far the empire has gone. And that's this is where makes people very comfortable. Even I, in my own networks, when I start raising the word, when I bring that word up, U.S. empire, people get very, very uncomfortable because they like to think we're different, as many people think they're different. But what's that responsibility when you have such an enormous footprint, and I have footprint across the globe in terms of both, political military affairs, but also in terms of culture. And we often forget the cultural aspect, McDonald's and all that, right? And American music and American style. And there's no question about that influence, right? And a lot of that does speak from individual freedom and liberty and creativity, right? Expressing yourself and who you are as an individual. But what's often left out of the conversational equation, right, is the footprint of the empire. And I think people like to, we're different. We're not the Roman Empire. We're not the British Empire. Well, actually, there's a lot more similarities in terms, if you really start, not even have to peel much of history up to actually see exactly what that effect has been. And you start doing a litany of our history, especially since World War I, but even going back, the industrial age, it's not a pretty history. And so America basically was handed the reins of empire by the British after World War II. And it was the American century.
I wonder.
I personally think 9/11 was the high watermark. I do. Yeah. That 9/11 was the high watermark, and that we are now in decline ever since. And a lot of people don't accept that decline because it takes, if you look at other empires, they didn't just disappear overnight. They didn't.
And nobody accepts it. So what's happening in government, like protecting your own power and your own...
That's correct. So what happens is power is going to be even more particular about its unwillingness to give it up. If anything, they're going to seek and out those who would dare destroy their power, or in my case, just telling truth about power. If you speak truth to or about power, then guess what? We're gonna come after you because you're making me look bad. They get into the whole psychology of power, and you want to hold on to it. The last thing you want to let go of is power.
Yeah.
So of course you want status quo. Of course you want to maintain the establishment. Of course you want to maintain your footprints around the world. You don't want to give up your bases. You want to, we've expanded hugely our presence, both seen and unseen, in the Middle East, Africa, the greater Asia, right? For what purpose? What's the purpose of all of that?
So is the scenario that played out in Rome and in the British Empire and,
Yes.
and the Dutch and the Spanish and the Portuguese and everybody, is that scenario inevitable then, you think?
I think, that the tides of history, if you accept that we cannot, America doesn't have a get out of history free card, right? They're not exempt from the vagaries of history. If history is any guide at all in terms of a pattern of the human condition, right? And I recognize that moral arc of the universe does bend toward justice, and I now add mercy, but it does wander, and it takes tangential. Some cases it stops. In some cases it rolls backwards, at least temporarily. But if you look at the wide sweep of history across the millennia, not just hundreds of years of the millennia, then yes, all empires, any nation, state, or tribe who decided to mount and absorb, conquest, extract from others, ultimately bit the dust. They ultimately ended up in the dust bins of history.
Yeah, and they would go down fighting. So that's what's worrying me.
Yes, go down fighting, and ultimately go down fighting, then fighting from within to desperately hold on to whatever is left.
Yeah. So marketing-wise, he was brilliant using "Make America Great Again." Then did an appeal to that very.
Make America Great Again. Like somehow America is not. It's really no. It's although the America First movement goes back a number of decades. But in essence, he turned the script of isolationism, which in many cases actually something I more admire in terms of U.S. history is not getting involved in foreign entanglements, not presenting yourself in somehow as we have to exercise manifest destiny over others, or the extensions of the Monroe Doctrine, right? Well, if it's in our backyard, it's, it's, we own it. No, you don't. Those are actual sovereign peoples, right? But no, that's the sort of the American spin on colonialism by other means. Trump's turned that script inside out. It's still the same script, but he's appealing to the baser psychology here that's at work.
Can I ask a question, Rico? Why does 28 EU nations and a couple that are halfway in the EU, like Norway, we have access to the market but cannot even vote on anything? Why do we accept that the GCHQ and the NSA actually broke into Belgacom, the ISP of the EU, took all the data they needed while they were negotiating the biggest trade deal of the biggest importance that there is? That is cheating in any way, shape, or form. That is so bad that I do not understand why we accept it. What are they afraid of? Is it, and I have to ask the two of you because I don't know economics too well, but I have a feeling that if a few nations stop selling their oil in dollars, we're in big trouble, the whole world. If the truth about the state of the U.S. economy comes out and the confidence really drops, well, then the euro goes too.
Okay.
And boom, the whole world goes too. And China, they have built so much, and it's an air castle. So maybe three empires, one former and two, China and the U.S. empires, are already falling. And it's just a.
So you've already posed 3 questions. I can't remember 4. So let's run by them.
Oh, sorry.
So first off, there were a bunch of countries that wanted to trade their oil for something other than dollars. Libya, Iraq, and Venezuela currently. Apparently, there was today in the news, just before this interview started, that America is supporting regime change in Venezuela. I didn't read up on that properly. But so, yeah, if we stop doing the petrodollar, that's a direct threat to America, so that they're not gonna have that. Now, Snowden made the point that Holland, the Netherlands where I live, would be a sock puppet to the American services. Well, as seen from my perspective, I can only agree. Your question is why? Well, this is just a feeling or whatever, but everything is connected to this banking system and debt, right? So, United States and corporate interests. So it's just, we want to be friends to the biggest boy in the room, and that would be the United States. So my government is just friends to those guys, and the leverage that they have. I don't know if it's even being used, but there's gold in the United States, and we're in debt like everybody else is in debt. You know? And the American military is everywhere. So what are we going to do?
Yeah, I mean, this is the post-World War II legacy. And so I think it's sort of, we were the protectorate, right, of the quote-unquote free world. But then we ended up, mucking around in everybody else's business. And this is, again, characteristic of empires throughout the ages. When you bring in intelligence, though, one of the things that people, and it's still a very uncomfortable conversation with people, is that it's not just the purity of intelligence in terms of threats. The temptations to use secret intelligence, secret operations for economic and industrial espionage are incredible, right? So why not, if you have the opportunity to spy in even on what you would call allies, because you want to ensure you have the upper hand in negotiations or as blackmail or leverage, you're going to do it. It's that simple. I keep trying to tell people, if this is not like one of those things where you're going to sit, especially when you're doing this in secret, right? And if it comes out, it's like, well, hey, we got caught. What's the big deal? Or what are you going to do about it?
Well, that's pretty much what's happening.
This is sort of the Colonel Cathcart defense, right? There's that famous book, the Joseph Heller novel, right? Catch 22, famous book in American literary history. There was even a movie made of it. I call it the Colonel Cathcart defense, because even when your power is revealed to be a power that abuses itself, especially abusing others, taking advantage of others, the retort is, we have the power, you don't. What are you going to do about it? And if you think you're going to, make something of it, hey, we have the power over you too.
Well, what Europe could do in answer to Ray, and what probably currently China, Russia, and Brazil and South Africa, what was that combination again, is currently doing is, hey, America, good luck with all that power. We're going to do business amongst ourselves, and we'll see you later or something.
And that's again another dynamic that plays itself out when you don't trust each other. You'd rather have division. You'd rather have sort of the what I call the old bipolar / very limited multipolar world, because it makes it very convenient in terms of propaganda about threats and xenophobia to say, hey, there's all these risks out there and someone's got to defend what's in the best interest, right? Let us do it because we're in power. So behind the scenes, obviously there's establishment power that's been long running. I mean, presidents come and go, right? NSA directors come and go. Politicians do come and go. Some of them stay quite a bit longer and make a career out of it. But a lot of people forget the other centers of power. That includes the banking system. Now, is it true that much of society, right, dependent on money flows and currency and exchanges and all that, is crucial to the operation of society? Yes, it is. Yeah. But yeah, keep the people in the dark, right? I mean, part of the press here, you keep coming back around. If people themselves are also, have to take some responsibility. I don't let any power off the hook. You always hold power to account, even at the risk to yourself and your own sovereignty. But how dare any power assume sovereignty unto itself, especially when they rule over others? That's not what I took an oath to defend, and it's not what democracy is all about, and it's not what that moral arc of the universe is all about. This is the third rock from the sun. This is our home, right? We live on this planet together. But it is in the interests of private interests and establishment interests to maintain the artificiality of all the differences and use that and exploit it against each other. And unfortunately and tragically, it's just all too easy to do. And in this world with technology, who commands sort of the power of the air? Social media, the mainstream outlets, access press, pronouncements from on high. Yeah, those tend to get the attention of when people turn on the TV or look in their social media feed, because those are the things and sort of the entertainment of that is what sustains it.
So we've made a nice summary, whatever it is, over the last 80 minutes of what's going wrong, and we're heading downhill on a global scale. So on a positive note, you made the statement in some other interview that whistleblowers are an endangered species.
Yes.
And, but on a positive note, here you are in my studio, living room thing, talking to the world. So you're still there. You're still making sound.
Yes.
What's the future? What does the future hold on a positive?
Well, you'd asked about. I do have a box in the background.
Yeah.
It's a box and it's open, and at the bottom of the box lies the 4 letters HOPE, otherwise known as hope. That's Pandora's box. That's what the box represents. So if you want to use the Greek mythology in terms of Western history, there's other history, but just Western history, Pandora's box was closed, but the Furies are kept inside. It's sort of like Indiana Jones, right? So you keep the Furies inside. If you open it up, though, guess what? So for me, that's what happened. I was eyewitness in secret to the secret Pandora's box. It opened up and all the Furies started to escape. And all I'm looking at as they're escaping is the abyss, and the abyss is staring back at me. But once the Furies escape, guess what lies at the bottom?
There you go.
What still lies there is hope. Well, it's not like this is over. It's not like this is an end. Some would say hope is actually the beginning. Now, is hope a strategy? No. But there is hope. And so I wouldn't even be having this conversation with you in your studio or with Ray, Rico, if I didn't have hope for the future of humankind. I would not.
Well, you're one of the guys you're one of the hang on, Ray. You're one of the guys that opened that box. So
yes.
Whatever is good for you.
Yes, that's critical. Opening the box, right?
Yeah, and it's going to be smelly, and it's going to be dirty and smelly, but whatever is on top of it. Exactly. Because you got to let all those Furies escape. No, I have to I have to explain this. So I've built this little studio thing a couple of months ago, and I was looking for a table, and I went shopping, and I found this old treasure chest, kind of a box thing. There I went to your Twitter profile preparing for this interview, and I see the very same box there with hope on the bottom. So that's a hopeful
travel. People have, when they went overseas on old ships, right? Didn't have airplanes. Guess what you would take? You would take those. That was your luggage, right? Joe in the volcano, right? It was his luggage that saved him because airtight and it floated, right? I mean, so in this case, it is a treasure chest because ultimately the very best of who we are with each other is, to me, what we build from. That's who we are. That's the essence, the heart of humanity is also the best of humanity, right? I wouldn't bother with this interview if I thought all was lost.
Thank you, man. Ray, okay. You want to...
It's beautiful to hear that you mentioned hope. And it's the only reason why I sit here. And why I also will take a little trip to the US and try to get a little bit closer to everything that's wrong. But you mentioned earlier journalists cooperating, independent journalists cooperating, and that there lies hope in that. And you're absolutely right. It is because there are good people out there. There's still good journalists. I have a network of 120 or so editors and journalists, and they all hate the 8 of the 10 articles they have to write. They have to write. That is pure propaganda or clickbait. And they so want to work on digging through stuff. And I guess that's why Barrett had a vision of creating a platform where this could happen. And it is one of the things that is now rising up. There will be a project that even takes better care of these consortiums of journalists. It will happen, and therein lies the hope, because there has to be some kind of transparency. It has to come back.
So with that, Thomas and Ray, that would be but I have to. Am I on the camera now? So just
stepped off away.
I know. I have to hang on. So it's going to be wobbly for a second. Hang on.
I see a guitar.
Yeah. No, this is my little closing message for hope.
You have a real microphone there. Wow. Yeah. That's a real one. Yeah. Wow.
I tend to make music, so this is a singing thing.
Ah.
You sing at all, Thomas?
No, I certainly appreciate it. I had a mother who was a very good piano player, and an aunt who also taught piano, classical piano.
Thank you so much for being here and for taking the time and telling your story. And it's on the internet. Everybody can see it. I'll post pictures of... Mail me a picture of your...
Look, Pandora's the ultimate box. Hope for me, I mean, if you want me to just summarize, because I say this, and it's the way I've ended a lot, or you say it's the beginning of the rest of the conversation. What is the heart of who we are? I mean, our inalienable rights are fundamental to life, right? The life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Those are actually inscribed in the American Declaration of Independence. And so all I do, right, all I've done, did, do, and continue in terms of my own being, because we're human beings, we're not just humans, we're human beings, right? There's being with each other. That's being who we are for each other, is defending life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Because how else can you have liberty without life? And without liberty, you cannot pursue happiness. I don't know of any other higher calling on an everyday basis and what that means in terms of inalienable rights. So when anybody, any power, no matter where it comes from, claims authority or sovereignty over those inalienable rights, I'm going to stand up and say something. I'm going to get in the way. I'm going to poke him in the eye, right? Even at great risk.
Well, after all you've been through, and now being this up to continue that struggle, thank you so much, Ray.
You're welcome.
It was really nice to meet you again, Thomas. And
yeah, you too, Ray.
Maybe we can meet over in the US of A in February someday.
Yes, I also look forward to coming your way at some point, right? You know, I do on occasion travel outside the United States, so.
Oh, you're welcome here as well.
Yes, no, I look forward to meeting you in person, Rico. I mean, I've lived in Europe. I was in UK for a while. I've made many trips, particularly since everything happened to me. There's always something about being in the same space with another human being that is far beyond just the technology. As amazing as this is, I mean, it still is amazing, right? That you can connect like this. That's the good thing about the technology, right? It allows us to connect with each other in ways we were never able to do so. Although, you know, it was interesting. You write a letter to somebody and then several weeks go by and you get a letter back, right? So, but I look forward to meeting you as well. So we'll do
that.
Salt to the earth. You know, we're all connected in terms of sort of the standing on that arc. And, you know, I just said, you know, I'm going to stand on it and jump up maybe a little higher, up and down on it, just to help it bend. That's all.
Take care. Thank you.